You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. The implications of what can be achieved with our minds, especially when you look at the physical health aspects of this and how people have been healed seemingly through different understandings, spiritual practices, consciousness abilities. What do you think is manifesting in us whenever we have things like miracle healings or even our own energetic healings that we can do with the powers of our own thoughts and positive intention?
This was something I examined in my book, An End to Upside Down Medicine. I have a whole section of the book on the relationship between consciousness and healing, because I think now, looking at all the research from conventional allopathic approaches to the more metaphysical, that consciousness is core to health and healing. And I'll give one example that I like to mention a lot. Anita Moorjani, who had a profound near-death experience when she was in a coma. She was dying of terminal cancer, and she had a shift in her consciousness during this near-death state, where she realized all sorts of things about her own personality, that she was judging herself too harshly, and that her bodily state was effectively a reflection of her internal state. She was resuscitated, and her tumors disappeared, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was going on. I mean, these sorts of things cannot be explained by any materialistic, reductionistic perspective, where she shifted her consciousness, and maybe she received energy in the near-death state. Who knows what it was? But in any event, it was something intangible, and physical symptoms disappeared. And these are symptoms that normally kill people, and these symptoms were killing her. This is one example out of many. There are many other spontaneous healings. The Institute of Noetic Sciences published an annotated bibliography just going through history of all these different cases, where we can't explain it through materialistic lens, but we can explain it if we say that our consciousness somehow is impacting our physical state.
Do you think that eventually, if we continue this path, there seems to be some sort of awakening on some level in humanity where people are having awarenesses that weren't there 5 years ago, and it seems to be rapidly progressing? Do you think at some point we will have the understanding that basically our medical industry is and can be obsolete?
I really do hope so, because the core of healing does not seem to be what the medical system is promoting right now. That's not to say there aren't emergency situations in which allopathic approaches work, but I think the majority can be healed through these alternative lenses. So I do hope we move in that direction. There does seem to be more and more momentum towards it. But it's interesting because the term awakening, when I first started, I thought of it in a broad sense of people realizing that there's more to life than this body. But I think there are levels to it, because one could be awakened in this way, but then maybe not understand the deception that we just talked about.
Yes.
Might think that, well, we can tell good and evil on the surface and not really understand how much lying and manipulation there can be and how much that exists in the world today. So that relates also to the medical field, because you could have people that are highly spiritually awakened but might not recognize some of the corruption in the medical industry, and that some of the medications that are promoted, if you actually look into them, they are toxic and not healthy. And yet someone who's awakened in other ways would say, well, this person's really credible and I want to do my part and I'm going to take this medication. So there are levels to this, levels to the awakening that are going to be important for our collective shift.
Something I've come to realize is extremely important for whatever this experience is, whatever this reality is, even if you want to think it's controlled by evil archonic beings that are harvesting our energy and loosh. That's fine, but I don't think that's what it is, because of this one thing. We have free will. We have the choice to interact with it or not interact with it. We have the choice to participate in dystopian systems or exit the systems. It seems like there is always a choice, and we're never presented with a situation where we really don't have a choice, especially when it comes to these moral situations or these really profound spiritual situations.
Yeah, we not only have the choice, but it seems that we have an ability to even know that there could be dark entities. And that's profound to me, because if we were truly enslaved, you'd think, especially by beings who are so advanced, then we wouldn't even have the capacity to ask questions. And yet look at what's happening. Right. Programs like yours and so many people around the world are even able to ask the questions. So it's that and the will to be able to make decisions that we can opt in or opt out.
Now, I want to go back to near-death experiences and what is happening during these transition periods. It's understood now that DMT is released in the brain whenever we are dying, basically, and it seems to be this kind of doorway to these other realms.
Yeah, there does seem to be a correlation between these substances and higher states of consciousness. And there could be levels to it, so literally different dimensions that are being accessed from the stuff. With regard to near-death experiences, many of the researchers who've looked at this have effectively ruled out psychedelics or any substances like them as the true cause. They could be gateways to help with the transition, but the problem with the idea that psychedelic chemicals create near-death experiences comes from cases where the brain is off, number one, in which case those substances wouldn't have anything to act on because the brain's dead. And also there are experiences called veridical out-of-body experiences, where a person is hovering over the body, seeing and hearing things, sometimes not even in the same room, but often from above the body, and then they're resuscitated. And they tell the doctor, they tell family members what they perceived, and then the doctors and family members and other people say, yeah, that's all accurate, but you couldn't have known that because we know what your body was doing at the time of that memory, and look, you were dead, you were clinically dead. Well, these people are coming back with a verified memory. A verified memory is not a hallucination, meaning that something legitimate seems to be happening. And when I interviewed Dr. Jan Holden from the University of North Texas, who studies these near-death experiences, she said these sorts of cases, the veridical, the verified memories of the out-of-body experience, they wipe out any physiological explanation. So I think it's not that the brain is not involved or that chemicals aren't involved in some of the experiences, but there's something even beyond that too.
Now, when we're talking about physical evidence for any of this, like extraterrestrials, paranormal, life after death, it has, I believe, presented itself maybe in the form of stigmata or alien implants or markings from attacks and things like that happen when you're in these altered states, when you're in a near-death experience or a contact experience, that it's so psychically profound that it really impacts something on you. And say that you're in an abduction experience and they give you a piece of technology to take back, and they put it in your body, and when they find it, it's just like a little pebble or rock. It seems like it takes on a very different form when we're in these other realms, that we can't take back the exact same thing that we experienced in a physical way, but it can sometimes show physically.
Yeah, I have heard the notion of etheric implants in addition to physical ones, meaning that there's an energetic imprint that could be implanted potentially that we just can't detect with our senses or our modern technology. So people would say, oh, you're crazy, there was no implant. And then there are these cases of actual implants. There are questions sometimes whether they're government implants or otherwise. So who knows? There's a book that I cite in my contact book. It's called The Aliens and the Scalpel. And it was Dr. Lear, I believe is his name. He was performing surgeries to remove implants and found some very strange properties. And in one case, the implant was moving away, like avoiding him. But there's not that much funding into this stuff, so it's hard to know exactly what's true and whether the composition of these substances. There were questions about whether it was normal that you'd see these things. So it's a very fascinating and an elusive area. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist I mentioned, he mentioned that the physical evidence in this space seems to be just enough where believers will say that's good enough for me, but not quite enough for the skeptic to be fully convinced of it. I'll give another example of physical evidence that people point to. Phantom pregnancies. So these are women who are pregnant for a few months, the pregnancy goes away, and they can't correlate a sexual experience to this. So this could be someone who's single, or I quote a woman in the book who's a lesbian, and she was dating another woman, and this woman said, did you cheat on me? Like, what's going on here? And she said, no, I didn't. And so what the idea is that these could be artificial inseminations by advanced beings. And what often comes up in these contact experiences is a sense of missing time. So they might remember some of the contact, but then there's hours missing or even more.